It's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up my books. Okay, so in addition to sharing my comic and illustration making process, what I really like to share often is my personal studies and what I do to try and improve my artistic craft. And something we haven't done in a while is fixing bad figure drawings. So, as I have mentioned in the past, I am a very huge proponent of life drawing and figure drawing classes regularly. So let's see here. Let's switch on over. So I have had a bit of a change of pace lately. Instead of going to in-person figure drawing classes, I've been either doing classes on online on Zoom or taking online courses. And I've been doing some studies using a website called Line of Action. And it's a great figure drawing tool. Well, it's a great drawing educational tool. I actually signed up for a subscription because I think that it is very valuable and it's worth paying for. Basically, it's a timed photo reference site where it gives you photos you can work from. You can do full figure, face, hands, whatever elements you want to work on. And I've also started taking a course on schoolism.com with Nathan Fowkes on drawing charcoal portraits. So I thought it would be, well, it's not even a matter of it would be useful for you guys. I needed to go through some of the work that I've done so far and just analyze it. And I thought, I'm going to be sitting here drawing with you guys. Now's a good time to do it. So we're going to be analyzing, I call it fixing bad figure drawings. But, you know, the purpose is to look at the drawings that you've made that didn't come out quite the way you'd hoped, and try to take a look and figure out what it is that's off that you can fix about them. And speaking of things being off, it's driving me nuts that my camera is not perfectly lined up. So I'm gonna tweak and adjust that just a little bit. Let's see here. Just gonna tilt this just a little bit this way and a little bit down. Not perfect, but better. That will work. Okay. So, where I am with these, I was doing some studies, as I mentioned, on the website Line of Action. And in doing some head studies, I was looking at a lot of facial expressions. And I think actually the page after this is probably the most relevant to what I'm working on right now. So, you know, these were all, I think, maybe like 5-minute sketches, you know, very fast, very loose. But there was one pose that I drew, or one face that I drew, and I was really just surprised at how bad the proportions were on this drawing. Proportions are my weak spot, but because of that, I try to put a lot of attention towards it, you know, and put more energy towards it. And so when one really goes off the rails, it jumps out at me. And so I paused the video or paused the time session and just worked from that photo and did a longer drawing. And when I was slowing down and take some time to work through it, and I see LOTCOG Lotcog in the chat says, "Good evening, Jeremy. Good evening to you as well. Thank you for joining us for a session. I'm going over some figure drawing studies and sort of doing an analytical breakdown for my own education, but sharing it with you guys. Um, but anyway, when I took time to redraw this drawing, slower without a timer running, I could pay more attention, adjust the proportions. But I started thinking just about the fact that in the same way that I try to break the head down into just primitive forms, cubes, spheres, blocks, simple shapes, I was thinking about, is there a way that I could come in and break the facial features down into not necessarily a three-dimensional form, at least not to start with, but a simple grid to work from. And that led me to this next drawing. Hey, see, James is in the chat. Always good to see you too, James. Thanks for popping in. Going over some figure drawings here. And I started looking at just a simple cube, a simple square. And I was trying to see if there was a way that I could approach expression and the placement of features with a very, very simple grid to just fit those features in. Not that every single face is going to have these some proportions. So I'm going to be wider faces, longer faces, people with longer noses, people with eyes wider apart, small mouths, wide mouths. But the point is just starting with a simple grid to block this in. And normally, when I've worked in figure drawing classes in the past, in terms of drawing the form, the heads, see Dylan's in the chat. Hi, Dylan. How you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for popping in. Normally, the method of head construction that I've been taught is more just sort of measuring, vertically, and then lining up so that the eyes line up. The eyes are a certain distance. The brow line's a certain distance to the nose is a certain distance to the chin, from the brow line to the top of the head, and then just lining the overall features up on that. But I haven't really worked in terms of having a grid over the face before. So that's what these simple sketches up here are, me just looking at that. And after that, I went in and said, well, let me try to break that down further. And that led me to some of these sketches where I was saying, all right, if this is the sort of proportion, the grid that I'm working at, where I've got it, it's like a 9 cube grid, and you've got the eyes on the top row, you've got the base of the nose and kind of the nostril in the middle row, and then you've got the upper part of the muzzle in the top. What does that look like when I move that out of a two-dimensional into a three-dimensional form? And so then I started experimenting with drawing just this simple box turned at different angles and sort of extruding, if you will, extruding the features out. Let me zoom in a little bit so you get a better look. Let's see here. Dylan says, I'm doing all right. How's your morning or day going? Pretty good so far. Woke up early, full of energy. I'm not a morning person, so it actually is kind of surprising for me to be feeling this charged up today. But got a decent amount of rest last night, got my coffee going, and I'm like, all right, gonna sit down, do some drawing. Let me see if I can get this to zoom in some more. So some of these sketches here, going in and just taking that idea of a simple cube that's broken into thirds, and then just saying, all right, what does that look like from different angles? And that's kind of where I've moved now. If I zoom back out, Where I am now is taking those same grids, these same cubes, and trying to now look at, well, how is the rest of the face going to line up with that? And at one point, I started trying to cram both the upper and lower part. So before I had it, if I've got this tiny little skull here, let me come back to the me view. With this tiny little skull, originally I set it up so that the uh, the eyes, the nose, and the upper part, the part of the mouth that is attached to the top of the skull, was within that square, and then the lower jaw was separate, was outside of it. And I started kind of putting the lower teeth in, but I realized that that's just distorting that cube that I was trying to work from. So I'm sort of playing with, how do the elements outside of that cube, that square, that grid, fit into the larger skull. So it's just me kind of sketching and just playing with primitive shapes, which I think is an important thing when you're working in terms of becoming better at drawing imaginary forms, drawing heads and faces, drawing things out of your mind, is literally getting a better understanding of just construction, just how things sit in the occupying space. That's really kind of what I'm doing here with the head. So let's see here. Dylan says, I've created a Pinterest board that's full of dynamic poses to practice with. I'm thinking of making it into a challenge myself, like a 30-day challenge or something. That sounds like a cool idea. I think you should totally do that. I look forward to seeing some of those pieces. Jay King is in the chat. Says, good day, brother and people. Good day to you. Thanks for popping in, man. Good to see you as always. All right. Let's see here. So what am I doing? I feel like I need to lower this camera slightly, which may involve my head being more in the picture than I want it to. Let's see here. So make sure I don't obscure too much. All right. I'll try to lean back and not block the camera so much. But all I'm doing really right now is just sort of playing with the idea of cubes and the forms outside of the cubes. So really, and the eyes might seem a little bit large in comparison, but these circles that I'm putting in here at this top layer are, I view that as the entire eye socket. The actual eyeball itself with the muscles would be sort of floating in the middle. And I also realized that doing this with a skull as opposed to a full face is somewhat misleading because I was sitting there also thinking about, wow, the nose seems like it's a little bit short, but I'm not drawing the full nose. I'm just drawing where this break is basically between the bone and then where the cartilage that the tip of the nose makes, where that bridge, basically where the bridge is, where it ends is all the part that I'm drawing. But there's a whole other part that's going all the way down to here. That's the actual flesh of the nose. I'm looking at the screen now and I'm like, this is still way too small for you guys to see what I'm doing. So we have the challenge of the fact that in order for you guys to really see what I'm doing, I kind of have to draw larger, which is a little bit antithetical to me doing these studies because I really do like to cram things in and work small, drawing a lot of tiny thumbnails. But let's see if we can split the difference here. Let's see, how much room do I have down here before this is off the screen? Not a whole lot. Let me just go to a fresh sheet. So let's say something like this. Oh, wait, now I'm too far. Got to zoom back out. I can't seem to cut a break here. Come on. See, this is where having a cinematographer of some sorts would help. So having somebody to just adjust the framing whenever I need it to. All right. Let's bring this down just a little bit so you guys can see better what I'm doing. Something like this. So let's just say that this is sort of the front facial plane of a head. Get rid of that extra stuff out there. And again, this is not meant to represent the entire face or the entire skull. It is just that little region between the from the eyes to the upper lip, really. Well, up to and including the upper lip. So this little arch over here is sort of the muzzle of the mouth. And I actually think I brought it up too much. I should probably bring that kind of like right maybe into the middle here. Oh, there we go. Let's see here. So Dylan says, I came to the conclusion that I will not be able to finish my mini comic in time. It'll have to be released next October. During the meantime, I want to learn to draw better. I still want to create a mini comic during this time so I can just get something out there. Now, I forget, what was the deadline that you originally had for the mini comic and why did that deadline exist? What is it that you're trying to get your mini comic out in time for? At this point, I am really keeping all of these proportions super simple, trying to make this thing as much of just primitive forms as possible. And honestly, this construction that I'm putting in here, I'm drawing this a lot slower than I should be, because the whole point of this is that drawing the whole head, you should be able to block it in pretty simply and quickly. This is more of me trying to analyze proportion, going slower and going into it, with a deeper understanding, so that when I do draw something that is a fast, a quick sketch, it's drawn. If I can get a really good solid sense of proportion going slower like this, then when the time comes to draw quickly, I can do so with confidence. Now, see, even with this um, process, the way that I'm sketching these features in here, I'm still playing with the idea of whether I'm trying to work in some of the zygomatic arch, the bone that's on the outside that forms the, right before you get to the cheekbones. It's the muscles that circle around our eyes, that kind of basically the form that the brow sits on. And I think that depending on a person's facial features and how their face is put together, you could make an argument that that the zygomatic arch would fit inside of this little grid that I'm making, this little, you know, 9-panel grid, for lack of a better term. And there's an argument you can make for it being on the outside. There's an argument you can make for it being dead on right in the middle. So the sketching and the playing with it is really about me trying to figure out what I want to do with these proportions. So let's see here. So Dylan says the deadline was within the first couple of weeks for their mini comic. The story is magic and monster based, so it would do well at that time. I've been procrastinating so much. I'm struggling with character design, set design, and such as well. Well, they say that there's an expression, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So if you're struggling with all those elements, character design, set design, maybe it's a matter of simplifying the story. Like, I don't know how many locations you have in your story, but let's say if you, especially since it's a mini comic, if you maybe had 5 locations, maybe if you simplify that and you can have all of the action take place in one room or one building, one set. Because even with one set, you still have to maybe design it from a couple of different angles, since the camera is going to move around, quote unquote camera, but you're going to move around, move your framing around. That might help with the set design. And then, same thing with characters. Um, I am curious. You tell me, how many characters do you have in your mini comic right now? So I guess, let me see with this thing here. Compared to the way I would normally start, like if I were drawing what I just drew, but drawing it as a full head, the approach I would probably do is, let's just say, hang on, I want to get a sense of like what my limits are on the page here. So let's try and get this proportionally about the same for a whole head. I might start with sphere, brow line, add a jaw, add a muzzle, and then in terms of the way that I've previously placed features in the past, the nose is a big landmark for the feature. But because the nose will usually, unless you're doing a straight on view, the nose will obscure one of the whichever eye is farthest from the viewer. And also the ears are prominent landmarks. But what I try to do is I try to draw the things that are behind them and then put those things on later, meaning I'll try to block in the cheekbones before I put the nose in. Block in the cheekbones and the eye sockets, and then I'll go back and right behind where the jaw joins, I'll place a very primitive kind of like slice of a disc, almost like an orange slice attached to the side of the head. A thin little elliptical shape, but then that curves back on itself to form the ear. And then I will come in and say, all right, if the base of the nose is about here, I've gone back and forth because in some methods of structure, I put the mouth right in the middle. In some methods of construction, I'll put the mouth kind of above that line. But for now, putting the mouth there in the middle, blocking in simple lips. And then from here, I'll sort of put in lines to kind of put the corner of the nostrils. Put the nose down there. Now, at this point, I've already gone past the whole reason for doing this construction here is to try to adjust proportions, but I've already gone past the point. Right now, even in terms of blocking these in, I would have at this point already started using a grid to say, all right, this needs to be a little bit wider, this needs to be a little bit narrower to adjust the proportions. Let me flip back over to Dylan here. So character design. So for your mini comic, you've got 8 characters, a group of 6, 1 villain, and 1 villain minion. So I would like to propose a challenge to you. It is your story, and you need to make your comic what feels right to you. So this is just a thought exercise. This isn't me telling you these are changes you need to make. I'd be curious to see what would happen if you were to just think about your comic this way and maybe just jot down some notes and see if it's even possible. But, oh, hey, And I see Paul, our buddy Paul Payton is in the chat. Good to see as always. And I mean, we had a great conversation last week. Thanks again for that. Always good to see you. Just got here. You're never late. You're always right on time, Paul. Classy as hell. But Dylan, so you said you've got a group of 6 heroes, a villain, and a villain minion. I would like to challenge you to combine characters. Just sit down with a notepad or even a or a Google Doc or whatever you write in, and just say, what would your comic book look like, your mini comic look like if you took if you removed the minion. So you had your villain and whatever personality traits you're going to have in the minion. The villain just does it all on their own. No minion, just the villain. And mind you, you might need, if the villain is by themselves, you might have had the minion there just so that they have someone to talk to, dialogue wise, as opposed to monologuing out loud. So that is something to be aware of. There may be a reason why you need to have them have someone to talk to. But you have, let's say you have your villain, and then you have a group of 6 characters. What if you cut that in half? If you have 6 heroes fighting this villain, what if you make it 3 heroes fighting this villain? And maybe for each character, you maybe take whatever traits would combine best, so that now, like, you just basically take half of those characters and shove whatever purpose would they play in the story into 3 of those characters. I mean, and to be honest, even if oh, well, damn. My old boy Jamie Parks. Good to see you, Jamie. He said you've been lurking in the bit. Figured to say, hey, man, I'm really glad to hear from you. I hope that you have been well and thriving. Another one of my fellow friend veterans from the toy industry, but also fellow comic creator, artist, writer, storyteller. I should get you on one of these streams sometime. If you're ever interested, give me a shout. Good to see you. And and also Paul says, I truly enjoyed our conversation. Yeah, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. It was definitely great times. But Dylan, in terms of taking your comic, I think it would be useful to ask yourself, if you're feeling overwhelmed with the number of characters you have to design for this mini comic, do you really need 8 characters? Because I don't know how many pages you were planning the mini comic to be, but usually when I think mini comics, I think like 8-page stories. And if you're doing an 8-page story, then that's literally like a character per page. That's a lot of real estate to cram characters in. And unless you happen to be Kevin McGuire or George Perez, that's a lot of work. So I think what you want to ask yourself is, what function does each character serve in this story? And can you combine some of those functions into characters and reduce the number? I always prefer to have as few characters as possible. So really, I mean, you might keep in mind, if you don't want to have if your villain needs to have someone to talk to, then maybe you do want to keep the villain's minion around. But in terms of the heroes, you might want to just have like just 2 heroes. So it might just be 4 and 4. You've immediately cut your cast in half. That's half the character designs. So you just have the hero and their companion and the villain and their companion. And if you do need one more character, ask yourself why. What purpose do they serve in the story other than just to be another person there? So something to think about. Again, it's your story. You need to do what's right for you. And if having a large group is important to the story, stick with that. But play with your cast. See how it feels like to reduce the number of characters. Because that alone will ease your workload and make things easier for you. And to be honest, the more characters you have, the more you have to try and figure out how to make each character look distinct on the page so that characters, the reader doesn't get confused. And that right there, I mean, that is the challenge of character design. That's a lot of the hard work you have to fight against. See Katie Cat in the chat says hello. Good to see you, Katie, as always. And Jamie says I might take you up on that. Well, I hope you do, and I hope we can do it sometime. James co-signs on that. He says yes, as few characters as possible. And Dylan also with the not Dylan, Paul also has a great tip, and he said maybe the villain can talk to the reader instead of the minion. That's cool. Go with the very Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Deadpool approach. We just because that'll eliminate some characters right there if you're kind of breaking the fourth wall. I mean, and the nice thing with comics is that you can also voiceover can be very tedious in film and TV. People are, can be very split about whether you should use voiceover at all or when and where it's appropriate. But in comics, whether you're using thought balloons or just a narration box, I'd say that the medium of comics is far more forgiving and accepting of voiceover in that form in terms of revealing a character's inner monologue. So that is another option for you. But no, that idea of having them talk directly to the character or talking directly to the reader. So Dylan says, I'm thinking at least 20 pages, but I'm not sure if I want it to be a serial, not a long run though. Well, there's a lot in that. It sounds like a very simple statement. The number of pages you're thinking about. It doesn't sound like it's an important question or important decision. But if you're making a mini comic, the idea of, and mind you, generally I've mostly done full single issues of stuff, or I've just done short stories that have appeared in anthologies. What is the experience you want someone to have with that mini comic? Because when you first said you were working on a mini comic, like when we first started talking, in my mind, what I pictured was a short story, like you would read in an EC comic or Dark Horse Comics Presents or like whatever anthology, where I imagined a short story that had a beginning, middle, and end that could possibly, you could use the character somewhere else or continue their adventures. Maybe you're just introducing them. But I really imagined something that was kind of a very simple, contained story. And it sounds now like you're almost describing a mini comic in terms of the format might be like a simple photocopied staple comic, but you're thinking of it as the first issue in an ongoing series or a limited series. And I want to get a sense whether that's accurate or not, because that might change the type of advice I'd give you. Because I'd say, first off, the advice I would give you is to lean more into a short story that you could continue, but does have sort of a beginning, middle, and end, like a Stephen King short story. Now, I would urge you to that because, well, it simplifies things to some degree. It allows you to really condense down to just a certain number of characters, as opposed to if you're setting up a world, you're going to be putting more into that story. There's a lot more that goes into setting up a world. And I think the reader experience, unless they know they're going to get the next chapter in X amount of days or X amount of months, whenever they know they're going to get it, it just, a lot of times, if you read like the first issue of any comic, or even if you watch the first issue of any TV show or the first episode of a TV show, you're left saying, all right, I kind of got a little bit of story, but really what I got was just a bunch of introductions. And that can be very unsatisfying. Whereas if you look at it just like I'm telling a short story, and it's literally this person has a conflict with this person, and how do I want to resolve that conflict? Really trying to pare the structure down to the story. And if it's something that you are still doing as a setup for a long-term series or a long-term limited series or things you're going to revisit, you can still say, all right, it might not be the final conflict that all of these characters go through and, and the big major arc of the story, but you may simply say, okay, maybe it's how does the villain develop beef with the hero? Or how does the hero develop beef with the villain? How do they meet? What is their first meeting? Why do they disagree? The short story can be about just one. What you do is you take one tiny element of this whole story you're telling and make that mini comic or that first chapter or that short story, make it about that one element. Um, and a lot of this I know is a lot to throw at you because if you already have the story kind of written and now I'm telling you all this, you might be thinking, "Ah, I already went down this road. I don't want to have to just tear my whole story apart." And you don't have to, but there are things that you should look at your story and say, can this make my mini comic a funner read, an easier read, um, make less work for me? Really, what you kind of need to do is you need to look at your mini comic, and this is a very hard thing for any writer to do, but you need to look at the story from the reader's perspective. You need to experience it like the reader's going to experience it. Are you giving them something that's going to satisfy them, even if it's open-ended, especially if it's open-ended? I mean, usually when you have a close-ended short story where just it ends and it's done, you're like, "Oh, there's nothing happening after that." That sense of finality, giving someone closure on its own makes an ending feel better. So the more open-ended your story is, the more you need to make sure that that experience is satisfying. So let's see here. Um, so Dylan said, in terms of having the villain maybe talking to the reader, say he'll write that down, and Katie also co-signs. That's a good idea. And there we go, even better. Paul says crazy villain, because monologuing, having a character walking around by themselves talking, it's kind of hackneyed in comics where someone is going there and giving the whole speech, especially if they're giving it to an empty room. But when you have somebody who's batshit crazy, um, yeah, that it makes complete sense to have a character talking to themselves. Or even better, they've got them talking to the voices in their head. So let's see here. James says, I'm wondering what you think of thinking outside the box. Is it always necessary, or can you be creative without doing it? He said, my thought is you could have a well thought out story regardless of thinking outside the box. Um, and also, I'm going to throw your other comment after that up. I also think that you can have a successful story or piece of artwork if you know what you're capable of. Yes, I agree on both of those points. So first, in terms of thinking outside the box, I think thinking outside of the box is actually overrated. Sometimes I'll be reading a book or watching a movie, and I see how much the storytellers are twisting and contorting themselves to do something that feels new and fresh and it's never been done before. And in doing that, it is nice to be surprised by a story and see something that you feel you've never seen before. But generally, what I usually experience as an audience member is I end up feeling dissatisfied because the story has contorted itself to such a degree and jumped through so many crazy hoops that it becomes either unrealistic or unrelatable. And I would rather have a story that is satisfying, even possibly predictable, but we get to that predictable ending through kind of that's where I think the creativity is when you end up someplace that you're like, well, I knew this is where they were going, but you didn't expect how they were gonna get there. That is exactly what I mean. And that is, to me, that's different from thinking outside of the box. Thinking outside the box is trying to say, I'm gonna do a comic book about psychic lesbian octopuses coming to Earth, opening all of our minds and taking us to a new dimension where, where everyone is made of, I don't know, solar plasm. I don't know. Point being is just trying to come up with something that is so different and unconventional and new that just like I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what this is. I don't even know why I'm watching this or reading this. Um, almost like kind of and I mean, I do think that there is value in absurdist art and something like the Dada movement, where you're really trying to break down just where you're rebelling against the idea of meeting and coherent thought and really challenging those ideas. I think that that has its place, but it a lot of times that isn't always entertaining. And as a storyteller, you need to decide whether you want to challenge people's preconceptions and create. You have to decide whether you want to create art or entertainment. And in an ideal world, you can do both. Frequently, in reality, you have to choose. And I'd like to think that what most people aim for is to make their art as entertaining as possible and to make their entertainment as artistic as possible. That is what I tend to see as the intent of most creators. Whether those are successful or not, I mean, history will tell. But that's my thoughts in terms of thinking outside of the box. No, you don't need to. I think that it's harder to execute something that is familiar and simple, but just well done. A great example of that, I would say, is Robert Kirkman's Invincible. I do not think that Robert Kirkman, and now mind you, I've been watching the TV show. I'm only talking about the books because I've read, I don't know, probably like 15, 16 volumes of Invincible. I still haven't finished it, but I've read a large chunk of it. And I don't feel that Robert Kirkman reinvented the wheel in any way, shape, or form. He just made Spider-Man Superman's son. That's it. And he just combined superhero tropes that we've seen before in very, very successful, entertaining ways. And I always said, you know what, that was the last superhero comic I was reading on a regular basis, because I was like, because it was just straightforward, good, fun superhero storytelling, but it was the execution. It was just done very, very well. The dialogue was great. The actual plots were great. The artwork was amazing. Ryan Otley and Corey Walker, all of the creative team, Bill Crabtree, who I've seen once in a while in the chats, and I had a chance to tell him how much I've appreciated his work on Invincible. It just, the whole creative, team just fired on all cylinders. And to me, firing on all cylinders is much more valuable than being novel, being inventive, being outside of the box. All right. I think I'm playing a bit catch up with the chat here. So before we go too deep, let me go back to so let me go back up here with the monsters. Okay, so Dylan mentioned with their the team for their comic. Said the team would be a witch, a black cat, Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, a ghost, and a werewolf. First off, if you plan to revisit this world, you can come back and add all. You could basically, what you could start is with do kind of the Buffy thing, because Buffy the Vampire Slayer didn't start with Buffy and the Scooby Gang. It started with Buffy, and I think Xander was the first one that she became friends with. I can't remember if it was Xander or I can't remember the name of the character Allison Hannigan played, but the one who is a witch. I think it was started with just her and one character, and then they slowly added other characters, Cordelia, Oz. Well, I mean, really, it just started with Buffy and Giles, the Watcher. You could start the story with I'm just because that's how my mind thinks. I presume that Dracula is the leader of the team, but you don't have to start with that. You can just start with whoever is going to be the quote unquote leader. Start the story with them, and maybe the story is about them and the villain, and they fight the villain and they lose. And in losing, they are saved by one member of what will eventually be the team. And that one member helps them, and they're able to escape with their lives. Or in some way, it's really introducing the leader plus one character, and it's about them. I don't know. Maybe they do defeat the villain for the first time and drive them off, or like the hero is about to die, and then someone comes to help them. Or maybe it's let's say that it's going to be the werewolf, and the story is about the villain hunting the werewolf, and at the last minute, the one of the other characters who is going to be leader shows up, intervenes, saves them, and they become friends. And that's it. That's all that first chapter needs to be. And in fact, you could say, let's say instead of doing a 20-page comic, let's make this easy on you. Let's say instead you're going to make it a 12-page comic, maybe 8-page. Or actually, no, let's keep it like in. All right, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Point is maybe it's just each chapter is about introducing another character into the team. So the villain trying to capture someone, you can just repeat that. That's your story structure. Villain tries to capture a monster, another member rescues them. And you follow that, you just repeat that story with different locations. You just do like an 8 or 12-page story of that. And you do that for like 3 in a row where you've got that. So now you've got a small team of 3 fighting a villain. Then in the next chapter, the villain realizes, oh my God, they're teaming up. And so the villain now finds a minion, and the minion helps them now, and they actually defeat that trio that you thought now they're actually pretty strong. They're stronger together, but maybe they've got someone to help them now that's powerful enough. And then you go into it. Now you've got a whole thing about building the rest of the team. And the point is that you can just use that simple structure, repeat it with different elements. Let's see here. Dylan says the villain would be a ghost king and his minion would be a witch. Well, there you go. Okay, it sounds like you've got a good sense of what you could do. And the funny thing is, like, if you've got the villain, if the villain's a ghost king, you just have the villain talking to other ghosts, other spirits. You don't necessarily have to have. I mean, the minion there, like, it really sounds like you're talking less about a mini. Like I said this before, it sounds like it's less about a mini comic in length and more about a mini comic in physical format. So. I would try not to think of these in terms of like ongoing issues. I would try to think of this kind of like Arthur Conan Doyle writing Sherlock Holmes, or I've never read any of the John Carter of Mars stories, but maybe something like that where each chapter is a standalone short story, but it builds the world larger and larger. Now, Katie says, I'm working on a race of sapient sentient bacteria. Their species existed for 3.5 billion years. They live amongst humans without detection, later becoming a zombie-adjacent infection. All right, that's a new take on the zombie apocalypse. Cool, good to hear it. And James says, I wouldn't want to get hung up on thinking outside of the box. Yeah, I mean, for me, thinking outside of the box is something more when you've been doing stories long enough that you're getting bored and you want something new and different to do with you. When you want to start pushing boundaries, that to me is when thinking outside of the box becomes important and useful. Let's see here. Katie says to Dylan, you can make this comic into a zine. And Dylan says, I thought of that. And Katie also says that's a similar problem Has Been Hotel has. Very little time is spent on the actual plot. It's just character succession, which few of which those characters contribute to the plot. And Katie says, woohoo, more talking to yourself representation. I talk to myself in real life. You know what? Well, I mean, all of us talk to ourselves. It's just a matter of whether we let anyone else hear it or not. And And you know what? I've heard of Has Been Hotel, but like Dylan says, I haven't watched it either. I mean, from what I've seen, it looks like a fun cartoon. Monsters living in kind of like Hotel Transylvania, but looks like a little bit hipper, darker, edgier. So I will try to check out an episode. Actually, the only thing I've been watching lately is I started watching the Amazon Prime Batman Cape Crusader, and it very much feels like they're just. It doesn't feel like they're continuing Batman the Animated Series, but it feels like it is the same tone in an alternate universe, if that makes any sense. But I'm enjoying it so far. So let's see here. Katie says, "Me too. I saw a few reviews summarizing it." Um, and they say, "True, writing is all about balance, a mix of both ideas." Yes. James also says the right having a lot of ideas but not having them fleshed out. Yeah, that can be a problem. Let's see here. Oh, and Martin's in the chat. I mean, at this point, I'm not even drawing. I just have like figure sketches up on here while I'm talking with you guys. I'm gonna have to get back to work after the stream, but this is an interesting conversation. Yeah, Martin says, hey, full house today. Yeah, I mean, hey, we're all here hanging out. I mean, this is what I enjoy. We're having an interesting conversation about story and structure and characters and what purpose characters fulfill in story. Which I mean, we touched on that from the context of the story you're doing. It's not that it's a bad thing that you have all of those characters, all of those monsters in your story, because it sounds like you're trying, you're taking these idea of universal monsters and bringing them into your own world and building a narrative around them. It's just that when you do it, you want to make sure that they're not just the werewolf isn't there just because it's time to bring in a werewolf. Um, and sometimes you have to develop you sometimes you start with the character that you want first. You may start with, I want to have a werewolf in the story, so I'm going to have a werewolf. That's fine starting with what you want, but you still need to develop that purpose in terms of, and in fact, thinking through the eyes of the villain can be helpful in this. In terms of, why does the villain want the werewolf? Why is the villain fighting each character? If you can look at through that story, that can give kind of the proper motivation for all of these people being together, and it'll help you flesh out more of the goals, the wants, the needs, the desires that each individual character has. Because each of them, if you want them to feel authentic, should have a different reason why they're fighting the villain. But those different reasons bring them all together in a unified purpose, if that makes any sense. It's additive. You build it together. Let's see here. Dylan says, I've recently been thinking about some of the if some of the characters are necessary, because I'm not sure how they will serve the plot. See, you're already asking yourself that exact same question. And that doesn't mean you have to eliminate those characters forever. It means you just eliminate them till you find their purpose. Stick with just the characters that have purpose right now. I'm going to give a shout out to a podcast. I highly recommend. There's a show called Writing Excuses. And I learn something new every week when I listen to it. And it's just a group of authors. One guy is a comic creator and tabletop gamer. One guy is a editor. I can't remember if he's an editor or a publishing agent in science fiction and fantasy literature, and then two other authors. But they've also have guests of different different authors, different people in the publishing industry. But they just talk about writing craft, the practical tools, the practical challenges, the issues that we face, problems that you don't necessarily know or diagnose in your stories, and making you aware of them, and then also giving you tools to solve those problems. I highly recommend you check that out. And Katie says, I love absurdism personally. However, balance and contrast are keys in making absurdist elements actually stick with someone. Why am I not surprised you love absurdism? I got that. I just got that vibe. So let's see here. So Dylan says, I'll be honest. If given the choice, I'd probably choose entertaining my audience over challenging them and coming off as too preachy and boring. Um, I completely that's where I lean. That said, I like the idea of the my favorite story is the story where you think you've just been entertained the whole time, and then they hit you with something deep and heavy at the end. Um, there's some people who I greatly respect who disagree with me, but I felt like Everything Everywhere All at Once was one of those movies that was very, very fun and very, very entertaining. And when I got to the conclusion of that story, I felt like it was very deeply philosophical and very moving, but still fun. And those are kind of like my favorite stories. Like Byron says, an entertaining story can still get across themes without having to shove them down the viewers' throats. Yes, and Byron and Katie also says agreed. Let's see here. So Dylan says, "Come on, chat's being slow here." Dylan says, "So far, the story so far is that the Ghost King wants to release ghosts into the world and take over the world, but how will Dracula, werewolf, and others benefit the plot?" Hmm. Well, to be honest, when you first started telling me this, because Dracula is the most well known, I assumed that Dracula would be the leader. But maybe if it's a Ghost King, maybe the other ghost in the story is truly the protagonist, and they're trying to stop them. And it's just a matter of whether it's a Ghost King or a real life king. This other person knows the king, knows that they are megalomaniacal, they're a tyrant, and says, I need to stand against this person. I cannot let this person rule. And it doesn't matter whether it's ruling over ghosts or ruling over humanity or releasing ghosts into the world. They're just like, I need to stop this person because they're a bad person. And then, in terms of how the other characters work into the story, don't rush it. That's another reason to make the issue shorter, make the story shorter. Um, and you could have it where maybe the Ghost King does have a specific reason for wanting to capture one of the monsters, or maybe it's and then the ghost saves them, or maybe it's the Ghost King trying to destroy the ghost, and one of the other monsters just helps them, takes pity on them, what have you. It can be a very, very simple story. But again, if you can really try to break this stuff down so that as opposed to the beginning of an ongoing epic that you need to figure out and it's overwhelming, just a short story about a ghost fighting another ghost. And one ghost wants to destroy the world, one ghost wants to save it. Start with a very, very simple structure and a very simple set piece. Decide on one location and have the battle take place in that location. Let's see here. And I'm glad Martin likes my summary of Invincible, Spider-Man as Superman's son. You know what? I can't take credit for it. I heard that description too long ago to remember where I heard it from, but I didn't make that up. Somebody else referred to it that way, so I can't take credit for that. But I'm glad you dig it. It's not mine. So I started by taking credit, and then I realized I need to retract that. Retraction. It ain't mine. I don't know where it came from, but it ain't mine. But I appreciate you digging it. Katie says back to their zombie story. The bacteria will be divided on the zombie infection. One side against it saying it's unethical, while the other side says humans are a threat to their lives. I call it empathy war. Sounds like some shit we're going through right now. And it's interesting that it's the bacteria are the antagonists and protagonists of your story. And it sounds like something that you could definitely have a lot of fun with. Absurdism. It sounds very kind of Terry Pratchett, kind of Good Omens wackiness. Let's see here. So Dylan says the witch is the leader. Well, there you go. You already know who your leader in your story is. You already know that who the person that they're going against. So I would start with the witch, the ghost king, put them in conflict, and then have one more character that can help that can push the conflict that they're in that first story in an interesting direction. You know, either either they're saved by the witch saves them, or maybe the witch is about to defeat the ghost king, and the other one accidentally bungles into the situation and screws everything up. You've got a lot that you can play with. Um, but again, what I keep going for is that you specifically mentioned set design, character design. You're overwhelmed right now, and simplifying your story can remove a lot of that overwhelm. And Katie says, I'd call myself an empath. People roll their eyes at that word. I feel other people's emotions very intensely. I love the idea of being a devil's advocate and making a case against empathy. I don't roll my eyes at that at all. I wish more people had more empathy in the world. I think that we would. Well, the whole point of empathy is that you treat other people better because you feel what they're feeling. So, I, but I think it's interesting to play with is following the dangers of that being too far. Almost like in I can't remember what the name of it is, but there is a movie where it's like all a society of all men, and I can't remember. It's coming out later this year. It was a YA novel where everyone is psychic now, and makes people just nuts. I'm not describing it very well because I haven't read or listened to the audiobook of it, but it was something I heard about that somebody famous was making into a film. Um, Point being is that having access to other people's thoughts can make us all nuts. So, and I think the same can be true of emotion. So it's interesting that you're playing with those things. Katie says, so part of the war will be me making a case against empathy from an empath's perspective. Well, I look forward to seeing it. I hope you're making progress on it. And Dylan says, I do like the idea of rinse and repeat of the team, losing and then introducing new potential teammates. I mean, that's a funny thing. I know Tom Cruise can be a lightning rod a bit, and some people like him, some people don't. But just the idea of something like that movie, At the Edge of Tomorrow, where he keeps dying, coming back, starting at the same point, going a little bit further, learning something, trying something new, dying and trying it again. You don't need to have your characters die over and over again in a story, but the idea of the repeating the same framework with different characters in the story, different elements, and different outcomes with each chapter. I think that's a very, very interesting idea, is just treating each mini comic as a try-fail cycle in the evolution of these characters' experience. And I think that that's the kind of thing where you do the try-fail cycle, like 3 or 4 different issues, 3 or 4 different comics, and then you start saying, "All right, I've done this. I've done these couple of elements. Now that I feel comfortable with my character designs and I feel comfortable with my storytelling, I feel comfortable with how I've written these characters, the ones that are consistent. Now I can start really pushing with this and moving the arc of the story forward." Which is why a lot of times when you look at something like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or hell, go back to like X-Men or the Avengers. When you look at the early issues of any comic, they're a lot more episodic. And same with TV shows. Like if you have a long running TV series, that first season, really like the X-Files in the first couple of seasons, it was Monster of the Week. And it isn't until you get into seasons 2 and 3 that you get these longer story arcs that are more complicated and more involved. In the beginning, it is just that thing of repeating the formula, but with new elements that are new enough to keep you intrigued, keep you from getting bored. But it's the same formula or close enough to the same formula that you're like, the formula is the reason why the person likes that show or that comic. The formula, like Hellboy, the formula is Hellboy fight supernatural creatures. You know, that's the formula. And they just repeat it over and over and over again. But it's the forms that the way that that formula expresses itself each time that becomes the seasoning that takes it from formula or recipe to cuisine. I like that better. Let's shift it more to food. It's a recipe. It's a recipe, but you start playing with those seasonings. You start playing with the ingredients a little bit. You start putting it's like, just use a little bit more paprika in here. Be like, oh shit, you're bringing some habanero peppers in this. All right, that kind of thing. I like that. So that I think that recipe formula is that recipe analogy. I think is a good way to look at it here. So I see Jamie in the chat says, I think if Dylan wants to introduce all of the characters, there could be a hero shot of the team at the beginning, but the core story is just one or two. He's saying, yeah, or vice versa, with the team showing up in the end. Yeah, I mean, see, that's another thing. Jamie says there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat because, like I said, these are all things that I think would help in terms of you making a story, but in the end, it is your story, and you need to decide how many characters really express what you need to. So you may come back and say, nah, I need all of these characters in this comic. If you do, so be it. Go with God. I hope that it's successful. But I do think there's precedent, as we've seen, for building a team over a number of issues as opposed to trying to jump right out of the gate with it. But I mean, John Byrne's done plenty of stories where he's just jumped in with a super team. George Perez has, so. Let's see here. Paul says, sorry, Katie, that creature exists in my studio in the basement behind my desk. You've got some sentient empathy bacteria down there, Paul? Hopefully it's the one that wants to save humanity and not the one that wants to destroy it. Let's see here. So Dylan says, for the team, I for sure want to keep the witch and Frankenstein's monster. See, and that's right there. You already have a strong sense. If you were to reduce or simplify at the start, you already have a strong sense of the elements that you want to work with in the beginning. And I think it would be a good idea to lean into that. Lean into Witch and Frankenstein's monster versus the Ghost King. Lean into that. Those are your three characters as your backbone. And then add other characters as you need them, And because it sounds like from this story, you probably are going to have multiple. The fact that you had a minion kind of in mind already, having other ghosts that serve the Ghost King, that right there, that's practically stormtroopers. You can just use those left and right and toss them in as you need. If you just need like a random villain, you just need somebody to fight somebody to get punched, or for someone to try and punch and have their hand pass through, just ghost minion. Just random. You don't even need to really think it out and design it. You can design those characters like on the page. But it's good that you have a sense of what the core is and start with that really, really strong core of characters, of protagonists and antagonists, and build out from there. Let's see here. And Dylan likes your idea, Jamie. Well, you're reading the chat. You see it. So, I mean, that's the thing. I'm mostly putting these on for people who watch the replay later, and if they're watching on different platforms and don't see all of the chat. But yeah, you guys all know. You guys know what's going on. You're sitting there in the chat. Everyone's cracking jokes. This is what I love. I get caught up. I see people just clowning and having fun in the chat. That's good. I'm glad you guys are having fun. It's making my day. Speaking of which, I'm going to try and get caught up here in the last couple of comments. I mean, I really didn't get very far with the figure drawing at all. I do have a lot of research to go into with this in terms of refining these ideas of, I'm doing my own simplifications, trying to create a simpler structure to play with expressions. But that'll be for another day. I'm going to just focus on the chat here, talking with you guys. And when I get caught up, we're going to call it a day. Which I always wait till the end of the stream. Hit the like button. And if you know other people who enjoy these kind of conversations about story and comics and art, hit the share button and send it to them. I'm gonna keep going with the chat, but I realized I always wait till the end to say that. I should say that like in the middle of the show. All right. Let's see here. Scroll back up. Scroll back up. Oh, see, this is a good idea. Dylan says, I also thought of creating one comic per teammate where they meet up, where they meet up in the team up comic story. I think that that's a great way to do it. I would that's totally how I would introduce it as well. Is just have the each one gets their own story of them getting introduced to the team. And they say they also subscribe to the podcast that I mentioned, Writing Excuses. Well, you know what? Hopefully, after you listen to a couple episodes, let me know what you think. I'm curious to hear if it's as helpful to you as it has been to me. and Katie is just cracking up over here. And I like the cat emojis because we have cats and they are. Well, none of them are in the studio right now, but usually Khaleesi is in here giving me grief while I'm trying to stream. Let's see here. Dylan mentions I've been meaning to watch that movie. I already forgot what movie I mentioned. I'm jumping around all over the place. So let's see here. Jamie says, if the protagonists are all considered undead, maybe their natural conflict, malevolent spirits dead. Maybe there is a natural conflict with malevolent dead spirits. It depends on your world building. That's a very, very good point. No, I mean, yeah, if the premise itself, you want a premise that sets up a conflict inherently that makes sense. That way you just like it's just a matter of following the characters and letting them be interesting. Katie says, I'm working on another race I just came up with. I call it singularity. There's a single member of a species that evolves instead of multiplying. Imagine if a person evolved from a microbe to a human in a single lifetime. That's a great idea. It kind of reminds me of it's not really a single person evolving from a microbe, but that Scarlett Johansson movie Lucy was directed by Luc Besson from The Fifth Element. That is an excellent science fiction film about evolution and human potential. I would definitely check that out. It's worth seeing. Dylan says all three of my 200 plus page books were the result of me cutting out a bunch of my characters and plot twists. See, that is crazy to me because you're so prolific and yet you cut out even more. I think that's how most stories go. And I'll tell you, that's actually a problem that I've been fighting with my Greek mythology story is it's very overwritten now. And I have the spine of a very strong story, but right now it's encumbered with multiple muscles and limbs and extra torsos. And so what I'm doing now is I'm going in and I'm like hacking out all of the parts that I really don't need and trying to get to that essential, lean, fierce, supernatural creature that I'm trying to do the story with. Katie says, I'm going for more of an existential crisis horror vibe, though. Whimsy and absurdism can be helpful, since I want the bacteria and their infection to look ethereal and robot-like. And all right, good. You're making some progress. Says, yeah, I'm writing it down. Good. Oh, Edge of Tomorrow. Yes. Yeah, so I do like Edge of Tomorrow. I mean, Edge of Tomorrow to me was fascinating just in terms of it being an explicit demonstration of a try-fail cycle. Because that's what we do when we write is we go down these mental pathways and look at this, say, oh, well, this could work. No, that doesn't work. This is good. That doesn't work. This gets us this far down the story, but at a certain point, you're like, nope, I need to back up and change this and that. And at a certain point, you eventually get to the end, and now you've gone through all the different iterations. It's like each novel or each graphic novel or comic is like a trip through the multiverse. You've gone through all the possible iterations of the story and tried to find the most satisfying one. Let's see here. Katie says, I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the mimics in Edge of Tomorrow, specifically their movements and body plan. The bacteria genetically modifies organisms. This served as a form of primitive tool similar to a human Stone Age. They genetically modify their viruses as their reading writing system. So I'm curious, Katie, what form do you see the story taking place? A single issue, a graphic novel, an ongoing series, a series of graphic novels? How do you plan to move forward? What is the next step for you? Character designs? Right? Do you write scripts for comics? Are you planning to do it as a mini comic like Dylan, a web comic, publishing something and taking it to your local comic convention? What do you plan to do next? Katie says their brain organelle is made up of a bunch of hairs. External hairs serve as their hands. Communication. By the way, those hairs come to their brain, so their hands are their brain. I see the surprised emoji. That is a trip. Let's see here. And Dylan says this live stream has made me realize that this story is part Ghostbusters. I think that's pretty badass. I'm glad it is serving that purpose. I mean, you know what? That's the thing. When you sit around talking with fellow creatives, they make things percolate. I'm gonna start using the word perkle. That's a new thing for me. Instead of percolate, I'm just gonna say that made me perkle. But no, in fact, it's funny you mentioned that with the Ghostbusters because I saw that Frozen Kingdom is on Netflix and I've been meaning to watch it. I just have not had any spare time lately, and I really do want to watch that while it's on there because I like Paul Rudd. Let's see here. And Dylan says, "Ew." I assume that's at their hands or their brains. It's only gross if you have a problem with getting brain fluid on you. Let's see here. Katie says they can talk to each other by holding hands or bio Wi-Fi where they transmit signals to each other. Well, it sounds like you really have this world thought out and fleshed out. And Lotcog says, is it stupid to have one of the main things in your comic music when you don't know anything about music? There are no stupid ideas, just stupid executions. I think that it is challenging to have music in a story if you're not a musician or don't know a lot about music, because it means you're going to have to do research. It means you're going to have to learn about music. So my first instinct, because I write about stories that I don't know enough about all the time, but that's because I enjoy doing research. So what you want to do, what I would recommend is look at what are the elements of music that you would actually need to understand in order to do the story. And I would also recommend interviewing actual musicians. If there's people that, let's say that you're doing a story about a concert pianist, maybe reaching out to a concert pianist and asking if you can interview them for a book. Or if it's just a rock band, then it's like maybe going to a couple of shows and trying to talk to the band afterwards, or asking people. Research is a big part of, for me, it's a big part of storytelling. And I don't spend enough time doing the research of talking to people in the fields that I'm writing about, mostly because, prior to this, it's supernatural Westerns. Although I did have a crime story that involved working with government agencies. I started listening to more interviews with government agents, but I never sat down and interviewed a person who worked in federal law enforcement myself. And that's probably something I should have done. And I think about that for stories going forward after this. So yeah, research. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying you should research. And Katie says, thanks so much for the fabulous stream and letting me exposition dump. Well, Katie, put all that exposition to work. I want to hear what your next steps are. And Dylan says, I love Lucy. Also, I love Lucy. Yet another, and I Love Lucy, another classic try-fail cycle. They have a recipe and they add new ingredients to each episode. They change it, they keep that recipe fresh. And Katie says overwritten is a great way to describe it in terms of having too much in a story. And Dylan says part of the reason I'm taking so long is because I'm learning a new art style for this kind of rubber hose, sort of like the classic Disney Mortimer, not Mortimer Mouse, Steamboat Willie style with the rubber hose arm. Well, I admire you taking on the challenge of a new art style. I tend to want to just work in whatever style I'm comfortable with because I'm lazy that way. I'm more interested in just improving my craft, but the style itself, I don't really worry too much about. So ask yourself, how important is the style to the execution of this book? I'm not saying that you need to dump it, but I am asking what's wrong with your current style. So, and I'm not saying that like asking you to critique and tear your style down. I'm saying, can you make the way that you draw naturally? Can you make that work with your story? Ask yourself that question because maybe you're creating another barrier in front of yourself and trying to say, okay, there is a comedian, Aisha Tyler. She did the voice of Lana on Archer. And she had a podcast for a number of years. And one of the things she would say when she interviewed other comedians was that what she said one of the hardest things about being a comedian is letting go of the comedian you want to be to allow yourself to grow into the comedian that you are. And I would say the same of pretty much any creative person in any field, comic book writer, comic artist, painter, illustrator, sculptor, author, musician, playwright, whatever. So ask yourself, are you trying to force yourself into a box that you don't need to be in? Let's see here. Katie says, I'm not completely sure, but I think I'd do a series of choose your own adventure style comics. Well, that sounds fun. Go for it. And Katie says, I'm mainly doing this as speculative evolution. I got the inspiration from a YouTuber named Create Ball for this. All right, that sounds cool. Go for it. Paul says I perkled some coffee this morning. Yep, I did. Well, I didn't really perked. I curged. I used a Keurig, so I guess I curged instead of perked. But I perkled. But I'm gonna try and keep perkled on deck. Let's see here. And Katie says, grossing out people with my bacteria, one person at a time. So excited to hear about all the nightmares I'm gonna give people. Right, I'm just gonna jump forward down towards the end of the comments because I think we're getting about time to wrap up here. Dylan says, nice, Katie, the occult, folklore, mythology are my special interest. And Katie says, sorry if my grammar is wonky. I just woke up from a nap. And it says, me too, Dylan. Cryptids are rad. All right. Dylan says, good question, Jeremy. They are, Katie. All right, guys. So on that note, let's bring it back here. All right. So yeah, I still have some figure drawing to do today, but that's on me. But for you guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you for a very stimulating story chat. We got to see Katie do a live brain dump of one of their future projects. And don't just dump that stuff in a folder and never look at it. I want to see you make something out of that. I want to see that as a comic or a choose your own adventure comic or something cool and fun coming out in the future. All right, guys. So again, if you, whoops, I accidentally turned something off. If you enjoy these live streams, would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. In addition to the bonus live streams, we have a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share work in progress, tips, feedback, general shop talk, share art tools, and more, give each other encouragement. And You get access to a digital archive so you can read my comics online. So all that for as little as $2 a month. There are higher tiers for higher rewards, but $2 a month gets you in. So head on over there and check that out. I'd like to see you hanging out with me. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morningstar. It is a retelling of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue comic book series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion to the series, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter. There's script excerpts, character designs, thumbnails. I show you how I use photo reference in the book. I basically show you how I put the entire thing together. So, and if you want to check out what's inside these books before you pick them up, go to my YouTube channel and you just look up GERIMI in YouTube. I should come right up. Scroll down to the book flip through section. There's book flip through, so you can see what's inside all these books before you pick them up. All right, everybody. Again, thank you for hanging out. All these stimulating, entertaining, creative conversations. That's it for now. Go be creative.